In the darkness of war-torn London, somewhere among the smoke, the bodies, and the sealed letters, a plan was hatched that, with an anonymous corpse, deceived Hitler's army and changed the course of history. London, winter 1943. The rain beats like tiny bullets on the dark windows of Whitehall Street. A thick fog hangs in the air, a radio broadcast from a corner. Luftwaffe planes bombed East London last night. In the basement of the British Ministry of War, behind steel doors and dim lights, two men are hunched over a wooden table. Charles Cholmondeley, an MI5 intelligence officer with sparkling eyes and a perpetual grin, and Ewan Montague, a smart, cool lawyer now tasked with deceiving the enemy. Montague says quietly, "We have to deceive the Germans, Charles, but not with tanks, not with guns, with a dead man." Cholmondeley looks up, cigarette smoke billowing into the air. "A dead man? What do you mean?" Montague opens a map of Europe, points to Sicily. "The Allies want to attack from here, but the Germans know. We have to make them think Greece is the target." He smiles. "We give them a body, a fictional officer with fake documents that show the attack is going to be on Greece." There was a short silence between them. The clock on the wall echoes in the silence of the basement. After a few moments, Cholmondeley says, "So we find a real body, give it a life, and dump it in the sea so the Germans will believe it?" Montague: "Exactly." A few days later, in the old morgue at St. Pancras, the pungent smell of formalin fills the air. A doctor in a white coat says, "This one was just last night. His name is Glendor Michael, a poor, destitute man, dead of phosphorus poisoning." Montague looks down. "Excellent. The phosphorus leaves a natural trace of poison in his body, like drowned men." Cholmondeley says in a tone that is somewhere between joking and bitter, "So Mr. Michael is going to war again, only this time without breathing." They prepare the body. He puts on a Navy uniform, they put his ID card, a photo of his imaginary fiancée, a cinema ticket, even a laundry receipt in his pocket. They make up his identity: Major William Martin, Royal Navy officer. At the table, Montague writes a letter that is intended to deceive history. To General Alexander, on the operations in Greece and Sardinia. He adds in his own hand at the end, "I hope to be at your wedding, my old friend." His handwriting is firm and decisive, as of one who knows that this paper will decide the fate of thousands. A few weeks later, midnight Greenock Harbor in northern Scotland. The sea fog has swallowed everything. The submarine HMS Seraph is ready to sail. Major Martin's body is carefully packed in a metal case. Montague and Cholmondeley are both standing there. Cholmondeley says quietly, "Strange, a dead man is going to make thousands of people live." Montague replies in a hoarse voice, "That's war, Charles. You tell lies that might be life-saving." The submarine slowly leaves the shore, sinking into the darkness, and the last sound of the waves echoes like a silent funeral in the night. A few days later, off the coast of Huelva, southern Spain, the submarine officers silently open the hatch. The cold Mediterranean waves rush in. The body, fully uniformed, is released into the water, his leather bag chained to his wrist. The sun has just risen. The salt water shines on his lifeless face. One of the sailors whispers, "God bless you, Major Martin." Without knowing it, this nameless man is changing the history of the world.
Early morning in Huelva. The sea mist is like a thin curtain on the sand. The smell of salt and seaweed fills the air. A few local fishermen, their faces tanned by the wind and sun, are busy hauling their nets ashore when one of them shouts, "Dios mío, venid aquí, venid! God, come here!" The men gather around and see something like a body on the sand. A man, dressed in a sailor suit, his face sunburned and of an unusual color, his eyes closed, his fingers half frozen. He carries a brown leather bag on a chain around his wrist. Inside the bag are several letters and cards, a photograph of a young woman, and a handwritten note in neat, formal handwriting. On the collar of his suit, the British Royal Navy insignia gleams. One of the fishermen, an old man, bends down and puts his hand behind his ear to hear the sound of the waves better. Then he whispers in a local dialect, "This man looks like an officer. These things, these cards, these things mean something." The news spreads quickly through the town. Several people go to the local governor, and he comes to see the body with a buzz of curiosity and fear. A man next to him, dressed in the khakis of a pharmacy, the local doctor, the local coroner, steps forward and carefully turns the man's head. The doctor, a middle-aged man with round glasses and a dry face, examines the body for a few moments. Then he sighs and speaks in the local dialect. "There are signs of drowning here, but there are other things at the same time. The skin, the expression, the tiny holes that might be poison. I must look more closely." The news reaches the British consulate in Seville, the phones ring, and in London, in the basement of the War Office, a brief report is heard. "Body found on the Spanish coast. See uniform, identity card in the name of William Martin." Montague and Cholmondeley look at each other immediately. This is the name that was made up for the body. A short silence. Then Montague says, "We must act immediately. If the Spaniards open the bag, or if the Germans get hold of it soon, everything will be ruined." In Huelva, the local agents and police officers are seen. The British consul arrives with an official look. He sees the notes, the photographs, the letters, and calmly asks the doctor to give a full report. But he knows that time is the great enemy of the moment. The news must take the right form and reach the right audience, to Germany, to their intelligence channels, and to the enemy commanders. At the same time, in Madrid, part of the local intelligence service, a complex mix of government elements and groups close to Franco's rule, is sending the news to the capital office. Information is always negotiable, especially in days when war is raging on the continent and everyone is looking for an advantage. A few local journalists also pick up the news. The photographs are printed. The locals talk about the story of the drowned British officer. But most importantly, the news also reaches the German channels. Germany, which uses every piece of information to strengthen its position, listens carefully. They were looking for evidence of what the Allies were up to. The letters and documents in the bag, if properly discovered, could send a clear message: an Allied invasion of Greece is coming. And that is the message that was meticulously crafted in London, on the desks of Montague and Cholmondeley. In the same coastal town, the local doctor, after a cursory examination, noticed that some of the files and letters looked relatively fresh. The paper and ink, the model for the photograph, even the dry cleaning, every detail had been carefully considered. But could the locals discern the depth of the engineering? Probably not, and that was the wisdom of the British. What was needed was seen, right and in time. Days passed, and the British carefully planned how to handle the story. The consul in Seville had to arrange legal discovery. The letters must be visible to the natural enemy, and above all, the documents must accidentally fall into the hands of the right people, people who have a chance of being quickly transported to Berlin. The plan is worked out. Copies of the documents must naturally fall into the hands of a German agent or an intelligence intermediary. But how? One way is for the information to reach Berlin through the embassy or diplomatic networks. Another is to use local secret channels, newspapers, smugglers, and double agents. But every piece of information that does come into possession must say exactly what they want the enemy to believe. In London, Montague and Cholmondeley hold a regular meeting with several officials from the Navy and intelligence services. One of those dimly lit meetings you see in the movies, plans on a wide table, cigar pipes, pages of documents marked in black ink, and men who, with a secret, humble, and sometimes morally heavy grin, decide who lives and who doesn't. One of the concerns is that the Spaniards, if they feel they are being manipulated, might leak the whole thing, or even sell the documents to Germany. Germany knows it has to pay the embassy and consulates, give them credit, and justify them to fit the story to the political exigencies of the day. In addition, the British have to make sure that Major Martin's death looks natural. For this, fake medical reports, copies of his naval record, and a romantic interest, a photograph of a young woman, and a love letter are put in the bag. These are all pieces of a puzzle that are supposed to guide the enemy mind. On the beach, another day arrives. The local man who found the body.
It is a warm, bright day in Madrid. Inside the German embassy, in a room filled with cigarette smoke and maps covering the walls, two men sit in deep silence. On the table is a khaki folder with a red seal. One of the men, a young colonel with a thin mustache and tired eyes, opens the folder. The papers smell damp, the smell of the sea. These look like official documents, letters, signatures, even details of the timing of the attack. The older officer, his back to the light, adjusts his glasses on his nose and says, "The British never lose anything by chance, but maybe this time we will be lucky." He holds up the letter, examines the lines carefully. One of the letters is from a British naval general, the other a personal note between two officers. There are precise military terms and references to operations in Greece and Sardinia. Everything is believable. Not too neat, not too random. The young colonel mutters, "That's strange. If it's fake, it's too neat. If it's real, it's too synchronous." He looks at his watch. The fierce Madrid sun peeks through the windows, casting golden light on the edge of the table. The older man takes a deep breath. "We're sending this to Berlin. They'll decide." The folder is closed, signed, sealed. And a few hours later, a Spanish diplomatic plane takes off from Madrid airport, carrying a confidential package in a metal box. Telecommunications. Berlin. Military Intelligence Office. Abwehr. A few days later, the air is thick and heavy. Thunder can be heard in the distance. General Keitel sits at a large desk, leafing through reports. His advisor, a thin, precise man with a tired accent, stands next to him. On the desk is the same Huelva folder, open. "A report from Spain, sir. The body of a British officer has been found on the beach. Inside his briefcase are military documents relating to Allied operations." Keitel narrows his eyes. "And the content? A reference to an attack through Greece and Sardinia? Apparently, the British are trying to draw the Germans away from Sicily, but these documents say the real target is Greece." Keitel smiles faintly. "Greece." Pause. "Sounds reasonable. Mountainous, defensible, and close to the Balkans." "Yes, sir. Initial analysis confirms that." The general pauses. He looks out the window where the rain is beating down on the antennas and towers.
Well, then tell the southern units to shift their focus from Sicily and reinforce their forces towards Greece. We must be ahead of the curve. At that moment, without knowing it, he makes the same decision that Montague and Cholmondeley in London had hoped for. London, the basement of the War Ministry. In a room with stone walls and dim yellow lights, Montague sits at a desk, reading a newly decoded report. Cholmondeley approaches with a cup of iced tea. "Any news from Spain?" Montague looks up from the paper. "Not just from Spain, from Berlin. The enemy units are changing positions. They are sending reinforcements to Greece." Cholmondeley's mouth hangs open. "You mean they believed it?" Montague smiles softly. "It seems that Major Martin has completed his mission." A silence falls between them. Not the silence of pride, but something like sadness and astonishment. Montague looks at the black and white photo on the wall, the image of the same poor man who now, under a false name, has changed history. He may not understand what he is dying for, but now it is part of the victory. Cholmondeley nods silently. Mediterranean, summer 1943. The Allied fleet is sailing off the coast of Africa. The waters are calm, but the minds of the commanders are filled with anxiety. As dozens of ships sail from the ports of Tunisia, reconnaissance planes report enemy forces are concentrated in Greece and the Balkans. Sicily is relatively empty. General Alexander breathes a sigh of relief. So, the plan has worked. The sound of ships' engines echoes on the horizon. Soldiers on deck pray. In the distance, the sky is calm. No enemy planes, no artillery on the shore. And in London, in the same dimly lit basement, Montague does not take his eyes off the rainy window. On his desk is a note. "In honor of the man who never knew he was a hero."
1. The return of silence. Years have passed since that day. Europe has regained its color, but the scars still burn beneath the skin of the cities. In London, the bells have returned, but the smell of ash and iron still lingers in the rain-soaked streets. The war is over, the Nazis have been defeated, and the world is rebuilding itself. In a quiet room in the War Office building, a middle-aged man sits at a desk. Ewan Montague is no longer the passionate officer he once was. His hair has turned gray, and his gaze is calmer, but deeper. On the desk lies an old folder with a faded inscription, Operation Mincemeat, 1943. He looks at it in silence. He reaches out, opens the folder, and pulls out a photograph of a man, the same nameless face who years ago deceived history with his uniform and fake briefcase. Montague whispers, "You never knew you saved thousands, and maybe that's for the best." He pauses for a moment and closes the folder. Outside, the rain falls softly. London has come alive again, but its memories are still lost in the fog. 2. In Spain. In the coastal town of Huelva, fishermen still talk about the day the sea returned the body of an unknown man. For years, a small grave has stood in the San Marcos cemetery with a simple stone inscribed, Major William Martin, Royal Marines, 1907-1943, beloved son of John Glyndor Martin and his wife. Every now and then, an English tourist comes by, lays flowers, and leaves in silence. No one knows why. No one asks. The only old cemetery guard, when questioned, says, "The man may be dead, but he still protects us." But they don't know that William Martin never actually existed. 3. Revealing the secret. Decades later, in the 1950s, war files are gradually being declassified.
Reporters are looking for forgotten stories, and one of them, a curious man from the Times, comes across a strange piece of evidence in the archives, a reference to a corpse deception mission. Rumors spread. Montague, now retired, says with a gentle smile in an interview, "Yes, it may have been so, but some deceptions are worth keeping quiet." But then, in 1953, a book is published called The Man Who Never Was, written by Montague himself. In it, he carefully tells the story, without revealing the body's true identity. The book becomes a bestseller, and the world reads in amazement as to how a body could change the course of the war. But still, the main question remains unanswered. Who was he really? 4. Return to the real identity. Years later, in 1996, a Scottish historian named Rod MacLeod finds new documents in the National Archives. He sees a name among the military cemetery records, Glyndwr Michael, born in Abergargoed, Wales, died January 1943, London. Further investigation reveals that this poor man was an accidental victim of fate, someone who had died on the streets of London from poverty and homelessness, and perhaps suicide. His body was what gave meaning to Mincemeat's mission. When MacLeod published his findings, the British Ministry of Defense finally confirmed, yes, the man who deceived the world was Glyndwr Michael. And in 1998, a new stone was erected on his grave in Spain. Under his false name, it was written, also known as Glyndwr Michael, who served his country well. 5. Montague and the memory of deception. In those years, Montague was living out his last days in his London home. A young journalist asked him, "Mr. Montague, did you ever feel guilty about that deception?" He took a long look out the window at the street, where children were playing, where the red siren was no longer heard. Then he said in a quiet voice, "Sometimes I think about him at night. We used the body of a man who had nothing, not even a name. But if it hadn't been for him, thousands of other men would have died. This is perhaps the heaviest kind of heroism, nameless and unheard of." 6. The legacy of Mincemeat. Operation Mincemeat was later taught in military schools as one of the most successful deceptions in history, a tactic that changed the course of war, not with bullets, but with a story. Historians write, sometimes a little lie can save 1,000 deaths. But amid all the reports, Montague's brief note in his personal notebook survives. We deceived the world, but we must never forget that we sacrificed a man. 7. The final image. Finally, our imaginary camera moves south from London, over the English Channel, through fog and waves, until it reaches the very shores of Spain. A gentle breeze blows. The sound of the waves is heard. On the small tombstone, a sprig of olive blossom falls, a symbol of peace. And in the background, a quiet, old voice says, "He was a man who never was, but he saved a world."
1. London, 1952. Under a gray sky, the city still smells of coal and smoke. Red double-decker buses pass through the fog. A steady drizzle settles on the old cobblestones. On a corner of Charing Cross, behind a misty window, Charles Cholmondeley sits with a cup of tea in his hand, staring out at the crowd outside. He has been out of the Ministry of Intelligence for years. He is no longer an agent. He is just a man with a notebook full of memories that should not be written. On the wall of the cafe, a poster for a new film is hung, The Man Who Never Was, an adaptation of the very story he himself was once a part of. Cholmondeley smiles bitterly and mutters,
Now everyone thinks the hero of the story is a fictional officer, but no one asks who the body was. The bell in the cafe rings. A man in a gray raincoat enters. Ewan Montagu. His hair is now white, and he wears thin glasses on his nose. The two men look at each other. A moment of silence. Then Montagu smiles and says, "Still drinking tea like always, Charles." Cholmondeley shakes his head. "And you still haven't come to terms with the past, have you?" Montagu sits down in the chair opposite him. The sound of the rain, the sound of the piano on the radio, and the smell of coffee fill the air. "You know, sometimes I think that man, Glyndor Michael, was more human than we are. We fought with lies, but he made truth with his death." Cholmondeley sighs. "And now everyone thinks of him as an imaginary hero. Not poor, not nameless, not hungry, just a noble officer." Montagu takes a long look outside. People laugh. Life goes on. Maybe that's what deception means. We just changed the shape of the truth so that the world can go on. The piano on the radio gets louder. A quiet piece by Debussy. Two men drink their tea in silence. 2. East Berlin, 1956, in the shadow of the wall. The city is now divided. The east side is cold and silent. In a small room, a former German agent, the same young colonel who saw the Spanish report years ago, sits at a desk. He is now a tired man, with eyes that have seen everything in war, and now believe nothing. On his desk is a copy of an English magazine. On the cover is the words, "The Man Who Never Was, the Secret That Fooled Hitler." He looks at the photograph, at the face of a man in a British uniform. His hands are shaking. He whispers, "We were deceived by a body that lied, and the world believed." He closes the magazine, looks out the window. Children play in the street, in the same city that once shook with the sound of bombs. Then he sighs and says, "Perhaps the worst defeat is when you don't even know when you won." 3. Spain, 1960. Cemetery in the fog. It's a quiet sunset. The sea breathes softly. In a small cemetery in Huelva, the old guard opens the door. An Englishwoman in a brown coat enters. She holds a sprig of olive blossom. She comes to the grave of Major William Martin. Silence. The woman kneels quietly and places the flower. Then she takes a notebook from her bag. On the cover it says, "Glyndor Michael, Notes of a Lost Soul." She is reading notes, the life of an unknown man who died of hunger and despair in London. He saved history without knowing it. The woman mutters, "Perhaps God used only one tired body to make the hearts of thousands beat." A gentle breeze blows. Dry leaves dance on the grave. The sound of the sea can be heard in the distance, like the breathing of someone who still sleeps there. 4. London, 1970. Among the Archives. In the basement of the National Archives, a young historian with round glasses is rummaging through shelves full of folders. A dusty file with an old number falls into his hands. Minsk, Confidential. He reads slowly, flipping through the pages, and a spark of curiosity shines in his eyes. The sound of rain rolls overhead, the smell of paper and leather filling the air. On the last page, he sees a short note from Montagu. "No mission is complete unless the truth is hidden." He smiles and whispers, "But now, it's time to tell." At that moment,
He feels someone pass him in the hallway, or maybe it's just the sound of the wind. 5. Epilogue: Eternal Deception. In 1998, the grave of Major William Martin in Spain got a new stone. On it was written, "Glyndor Michael, also known as Major William Martin. He served his country well." The beach is the same, the sea is calm, but now no wave is silent. Sometimes a sailor passing by says that on foggy nights a sound comes from afar, the sound of footsteps crossing the sand and disappearing. Perhaps it is the spirit of someone who never was, but saved the world.
An old table lamp casts its yellow light on a wooden table. Cigarette smoke fills the air. Charles Cholmondeley is now an old man, with trembling hands and an open notebook in front of him. He still lives in the same old house in South London. On the wall hangs a map of Europe from the war. The red and blue dots have faded, but he still knows what each dot meant. In his notebook, he writes, "We thought deception would end, but lies are like smoke. They linger in the air, swirl, and then return again." A documentary about World War II is playing on the radio. The announcer says, "Operation Mincemeat was one of the most successful deceptions in the history of war." Cholmondeley smiles bitterly and whispers in a tired voice, "Most successful? Perhaps. But no one talks about the nights when we woke up from nightmares." He raises his cup. His hand shakes. Tea drips onto the table next to an old photo of himself and Montague in military uniform and with youthful smiles. 2. Oxford, 1984. A youth among books. In the Oxford University Library, Jonathan Pierce, a historian, is writing a dissertation on the ethics of military deception. Among his sources, he comes across a rare document, a letter from Montague to a colleague in 1950. In it he writes, "Sometimes, to save the truth, you have to fight lies, but God forbid, no one would want to be in our place." Jonathan writes excitedly, but something inside him tickles, a kind of doubt, a kind of hidden sadness. He asks himself, if deception saves thousands of lives, is it still a sin? He looks out the window. Autumn leaves are falling. It seems as if history has not yet answered. 3. Spain, 1989. The waves repeat the secret. The new caretaker of the cemetery, a young man with a black beard, cleans the grave of Major Martin every day. He does not know the meaning of the inscriptions on the stone, but he always feels that this grave is different. Some nights, when the wind blows from the sea, he hears a voice like a soft whisper. "I never was, but you are, because I was not." He laughs, thinking it is his imagination, but the next time, on the gravestone, he sees an unripe olive branch. Nobody knows who has left it. 4. London, 1993. The end of Montague. In a quiet house in Kensington, Ewan Montague is lying sick. The air is foggy. The old clock ticks silently. Beside his bed, his son sits, holding a book, The Man Who Never Was. The son asks, "Father, who was that man really?" Montague says in a quiet voice, his eyes half open, "A ghost, a nobody, someone he wanted the world to forget, but the world lived on because of him." He silences for a moment, then smiles. "Maybe I was just a writer. The hero he was." A moment later, the clock stops ticking. 5. Wales, 2000. Where it all began. Morning fog rolls over the Welsh mountains. In a small village, a rusty sign reads,
Abergargord, birthplace of Glyndwr Michael. A middle-aged man erases it silently. Perhaps he is the grandson of an old friend. In his hand is a clipping from an old newspaper that reads, "The man who never was. Now we know his name." He looks up at the sky, at the mountains shrouded in mist. He whispers, "Glendor, you are finally home." Six. Today, in the heart of history. In the London War Museum, visitors pass through the vitrines. In one of them, an old leather briefcase shines in the yellow light of the exhibition. A small plaque below reads, "Briefcase used in Operation Mincemeat, 1943. A child asks his father, "Dad, what is this?" His father says, "A deception that saved many lives." The child shakes his head. "So is that man a hero?" The father says, "He may not be a hero, but without him, heroes could not return." Seven. The last note. In the old Cholmondeley office, among the books and maps, a note is found. The handwriting is shaky but legible. "Wars end, but deceptions live forever. The truth always hides itself behind lies so that the world can endure." Signed below, C.C., London, 1979. The wind blows through the window, the paper flutters, and somewhere outside, the sound of a train is heard starting again from a distant station, like history that always continues.
The air is hot and dry. The wind howls through the tents. At the Allied headquarters, under dusty flags, a few British officers are gathered around a large table. On the table is a map of the Mediterranean. General Harold Alexander says with tired but determined eyes, "The German reports have completely convinced us that the attack will come from Greece." Mincemeat has answered, "Now it is time to prepare for the second wave." A young officer pulls a piece of paper from the corner of the table. On it is written in faded ink, "Operation Barclay, Southern Deception Network." Eyes sparkle. Deception is now not just bodies and letters, but an imaginary army, an army of shadows and stories. German reconnaissance planes fly over the Mediterranean. Cameras monitor the Sicilian coast from above. But what they see is more fantasy than reality. Inflatable boats, wooden tanks, and tents filled with uniformed scarecrows. In the darkness of the night, the moonlight glints off the silver canvas of the boats. From a distance, it looks like a vast force poised to attack. Meanwhile, a British officer named Captain Lawrence Freeman looks down from behind a hill and mutters, "A lie, if told well, is truer than the truth." In a narrow, quiet alley in occupied Athens, a woman in a black veil walks through the shadows. She carries a small letter, which she hides under a stone in the wall. Her code name is Irene, an MI9 agent working behind enemy lines. The letter contains a fake report on the readiness of British forces in Greece, part of the same deception as Mincemeat. He knows that if he is found out, his death is certain. But before he leaves, he prays under his breath, "For every truth, a lie is needed to save him." Suddenly, the sound of boots echoes in the alley. The German patrol approaches. Irene runs into the darkness, the sound of gunfire, and then only the sound of the wind between the stone walls remains. In the Wehrmacht headquarters, the German generals are gathered around the maps. General Jodl says confidently, "Our reports are clear. The Allies intend to attack from Greece. Sicily is just a trap."
Hitler says in a tired but firm voice, "Reinforce Greece. Transfer the armored forces immediately." At that moment, the deception reaches its peak. The plans are based on a body found in Spain. On the table, the order to attack Sicily remains unread. On the same night that Germany sends its forces to Greece, the Allied fleet silently crosses the Mediterranean. Thousands of soldiers stand in the dark under a starry sky, preparing to land on the coast of Sicily. In the silence of the night, an American captain named Jones tells his soldiers, "They think we are there. Tonight we are their own shadows." The sound of the waves and the breathing of the soldiers mingle. Suddenly, the sky lights up with the fiery light of artillery. Screams, explosions, and the smell of salt and gunpowder fills the air. Operation Husky has begun, the invasion of Sicily. In the basement of MI5 headquarters, Montague stands with a wireless. The sound of decoding is heard from the device. One of the officers says, "The troops have landed on the beach without heavy resistance, sir. The deception has worked." Montague takes a deep breath. He pauses for a moment. "And now we must only pray that the man in the sea knows that he has won." Amid the ruins of the harbor, smoke fills the air. British soldiers advance. In the flames, a British plaque falls to the ground. A young officer bends down and picks it up. It reads, "He fought where lies were truth." With the victory in Sicily, the road to Italy is opened. The news reaches London, and on the walls of the headquarters a sentence is written, "The man who never was won the battle that was." But at sea, where it all began, the waves gently reach the shore, and perhaps a voice from the depths says, "My lies were your truth."
Soft snow settles on the roofs of London. The air smells of coal and fog. In the basement of the Ministry of War, the intelligence officers of MI5 and MI6 have gathered again. On the wall is a huge map of France and the English Channel. In a corner, Montague, his hair now grayer, is quietly writing on the map with a black pen. Fortitude, North. Bodyguard, all of Europe. He mutters, "If mincemeat can escape with a body, bodyguard must escape with a fantasy." The new objective is clear: to deceive Hitler about the true location of the Allied invasion. In fact, they are to invade Normandy, but the Germans must believe that the destination is Pas-de-Calais in northern France. This mission no longer involves bodies, but uses living but disguised humans. Double agents, fake radio messages, and even a fictional army of soldiers are created in the south of England. Inflatable tanks, wooden planes, and the artificial sounds of military activity in mock camps. From the sky, everything seems real to the Germans. At the heart of the operation is a figure created by General George Patton, a real American hero, but his mission this time is fictional. Rumors spread that he's preparing a major attack on the port of Calais. News is deliberately leaked to German spies in London. On the radio, fake voices of officers are broadcast. Empty trucks ply the roads at night to make it appear that the army is on the move. The world is breathing the deception. In the German command office, General Judel stares at the maps again. His intelligence officer says, "Reports confirm that the main Allied forces are positioned opposite Calais. Normandy is just a diversion." Jodl smiles, exactly as I predicted. He sends the news to Berlin. And at that very moment, thousands of lives are saved because the German army sees an imaginary army as real. In the English Channel, real ships are moving,
But on the enemy's radar, these signals are mixed with hundreds of fake signals. On the night before D-Day, British agents